Some wounds do not bleed, yet they leave marks deeper than scars. In the courtyard of Boston's most prestigious private academy, where marble columns gleamed like they had been carved to impress history itself, a boy no taller than the iron gates carried a secret weight. His name was Ethan Hale. He was 6 years old, the son of one of America's wealthiest men, and every step he took betrayed both defiance and fragility. For beneath his neatly pressed trousers, one leg was not his own. It was steel and plastic, an artificial limb whose joints clicked faintly against the cobblestones, a reminder of an accident he could not remember, but would never escape. The other children had learned to notice. Children, after all, are cruel before they are kind. There he is, the tin soldier. No, worse. He's just a broken rich kid, nothing but a cripple with money. The whispers flitted like sparrows, too fast for adults to catch, but sharp enough to cut into Ethan's chest. He gripped the strap of his backpack as though it might shield him, his small fingers digging into the fabric. His face betrayed no tears, only that hollow stillness of someone who had already learned what it meant to stand apart. This was the price of being different in a world that worshipped sameness. It happened quickly, almost predictably. A larger boy, freckled and smug, stuck out his foot as Ethan passed. The prosthetic joint caught. Ethan stumbled and went sprawling face first onto the gravel. His palms tore open, his cheek pressed hard into the cold stones. The metallic clatter of his artificial limb echoed like laughter from the earth itself. The crowd howled. Some mimicked the mechanical thump of his leg with cruel rhythm. Others simply looked away, afraid that pity might stain their own standing. For a breathless moment, Ethan lay still, staring at the ground. He could have stayed there. He had grown used to it. He had learned silence was safer than resistance. Then a voice cut through the jeers. "Stop it!" It was not loud, but it sliced the air like a blade. The crowd turned. Standing at the edge of the circle was a girl who clearly did not belong. Her dress was plain, her sneakers worn to threads, her hair tied unevenly as though brushed in haste. But her eyes, blue-gray like the sky before a storm, shone with something no tuition could buy: courage. Her name was Lily Carter, 6 years old, daughter of a farmhand who had never lived to see her grow, and of a mother who scrubbed the floors of this very academy. She was here not by wealth, but by a fragile community support grant, a policy that allowed children of the staff to sit in classrooms gilded by privilege. The other students knew it well. They looked at her with disdain as though she were a blemish on their polished world. And yet here she stood, small and shaking, but unyielding. "Don't touch him again," Lily said, her voice trembling but firm as she stepped between Ethan and the circle of jeering boys. Silence followed, awkward and uncertain. No one had ever defended Ethan before, not once. The ringleader sneered. "What are you going to do, farm girl? Sweep the playground with your mommy's broom?" Laughter rippled but weaker now, as though even mockery faltered before her stubborn stance. Lily's hands trembled at her sides, but she did not step back. And for the first time in days, maybe weeks, Ethan lifted his head. Their eyes met. She did not look at him with pity or disgust, only with an odd, unspoken certainty. "You are not alone anymore." A teacher's voice in the distance eventually scattered the crowd. The children slunk away, muttering, already searching for some other cruelty to fill the void. Ethan sat up slowly, brushing dust from his jacket. He expected Lily to leave, to melt back into her invisibility. Instead, she crouched down beside him. "You okay?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. No one had asked him that in earnest for as long as he could remember. "I'm fine," he murmured. But his eyes betrayed otherwise. From the socket of his prosthetic leg, loosened by the fall, a tiny steel bolt rolled across the stone. Ethan picked it up, turned it between his fingers for a moment, then pressed it into Lily's small hand. "Keep it," he whispered. "It's a good luck charm, a courage bolt." She frowned, confused. "But you need it." "Maybe," Ethan said, forcing a fragile smile. "But I think you need it more." When the bell rang, the courtyard emptied. Ethan limped toward the black car waiting to ferry him back to a mansion echoing with marble and silence. Lily walked in the opposite direction, toward her mother's janitor's closet where the scent of bleach clung to faded uniforms. Yet in their pockets, steel for Lily and hope for Ethan, something had shifted. The world was still divided, rich and poor, whole and broken, marble and mop water. But in that division, a single bridge had been laid. And though neither child could know it yet, that fragile bridge would one day carry them through betrayal. Through hospital wards and courtrooms, through a trial of justice itself. Some stories begin in palaces, others in barns. This one began in a schoolyard, with a boy who had everything except freedom, and a girl who had nothing except courage. And between them, clutched in a small hand, was a single steel bolt, destined to become more powerful than any fortune or decree. The house at the edge of the fields had grown old with silence. Its boards sagged, its porch leaned, its windows trembled in the wind as though remembering grief. It had once been alive with a man's laughter, a laugh so round and rich it seemed to roll across the fields themselves. That laughter was gone now, buried under the soil with the man who had given it, leaving only his tools rusting in the shed and the faint smell of oil where the tractor had last coughed before it crushed him. Lily Carter, 6 years old, came home from school each day to this house. She closed the door softly, the way her mother had taught her, so the hinges would not wake ghosts. She laid her backpack on a chair with one wobbly leg and cut a slice of bread from the loaf. She spread it with honey and ate standing at the counter, staring through the window at the plow tangled with vine in the far corner of the yard. She half expected it to move, to undo what it had done, to bring her father back. But the plow was only steel, and steel does not repent. Her mother, Sarah, worked late as a janitor at the school. Floors to mop, windows to polish, bathrooms to scrub until they gleamed with a pride that was not their own. Lily did what she could to keep the little house orderly. She rinsed the knife, tucked away the bread, wiped the counter. She carried her school book to the bedroom where her mother had moved her bed after the funeral, pulling it into a corner so that the room would feel less empty. Above the chair by the window was a square of lighter paint, the place where a picture of her father had once hung. Sarah had taken it down because the smile in it was too loud for grief. The room was quiet. Lily read her lessons slowly, lips moving, sounding out the hard words. When she stumbled, she touched the little steel bolt in her pocket, the one Ethan had pressed into her hand, calling it a courage bolt. She whispered the word to it and tried again. Somehow the words seemed easier after that. Children invent rituals the way other people invent machines, small spells to keep the dark away. At dusk, she heated a pot of leftover soup. When Sarah came home, her hair damp with sweat, her uniform smelling of bleach and window cleaner, she found Lily standing on a chair, stirring with solemn care. "You shouldn't have waited," Sarah said, placing her keys in the chipped blue bowl. "I wanted it hot," Lily replied. "It tastes better when it's trying." The words startled Sarah. She smiled, though it was the kind of smile that only half remembered how to exist. They ate together at the little table, the silence between them not heavy but woven, like a blanket they both held. Sarah asked about school. Lily told her about the science room that smelled like rain, about the spelling test, about the plant with pink veins in its leaves that looked like a map. She did not speak of the courtyard boys, nor of Ethan's stumble. Some truths children keep for themselves, but she placed the bolt on the table beside her spoon. "What's that?" Sarah asked. "A bolt," Lily said. "From a leg, for courage." Sarah frowned, touched it lightly with her fingertip. The grease stain clung to her skin. Some objects carry weight beyond their size. She withdrew her hand and nodded. "Then keep it safe." Later, in the living room, Sarah mended her blouse with a needle and thread while Lily leaned against her. They did not speak of the tractor or the day it betrayed them. They almost never used the word accident. It was too large, too clumsy. Her father had been a man who understood bolts, leverage, weather. One wrong second had stolen all of that. Better to let silence hold the memory than language bruise it again. Before bed, Lily set the courage bolt on the windowsill so the moon could find it. She fell asleep with her palm open, as if waiting for something unseen to fall into it. At dawn, the alarm rattled them awake. Sarah dressed in the dark, hands trained by habit. Blouse, slacks, shoes, hair pinned tight. She kissed Lily's temple. "Up, soldier," she whispered. Their private joke. A command not of war, but of standing. The truck groaned but started. They drove past fields that seemed half asleep, the horizon wrapped in pale pink scarves. In town, the bakery opened, the smell of bread spreading yes to everyone who asked. At the school, Sarah tied her apron and filled her mop bucket. The building was still humble in the early light, before students arrived to remind it of its grandeur. The auditorium was only a room, the staircase just wood and marble. There is a holiness in morning work. Sarah moved with quiet efficiency, as though she were writing calligraphy in reverse, lines of water that erased. "Morning, Ms. Carter," the nurse said kindly, coffee in hand. Sarah nodded, grateful but cautious. She had learned that some greetings meant, "I see you," and others meant, "I will not." Lily noticed the difference, too. She saw how her mother stepped aside without ever shrinking, how the mop handle shone smooth where her hands had worn it down. She saw how polished floors gleamed, not like money, but like mercy. Lily tucked her book into her backpack and kissed her mother goodbye. "See you after," she said. "Be bright," Sarah replied. In the courtyard, Lily paused under the ginkgo tree, the bolt warm against her thigh. Across the yard, a black car idled. Ethan stepped out carefully, as if the ground might change its mind about holding him. His eyes found hers, uncertain but searching. She raised her hand in a small wave, not wanting to draw attention. He lifted his own hand in return, hesitant but grateful. Then a shadow fell between them. A woman's hand, manicured and sharp, clamped down on Ethan's shoulder. "Chin up," Veronica Hale commanded, her perfume cutting the morning air. Lily lowered her hand. She did not yet have words for the feeling that rose inside her, but she knew clouds when they gathered. She closed her fingers around the bolt and whispered to herself, "Be small where smallness is wise. Be big where bigness is required." The bell rang. Doors opened. Children vanished into classrooms. The day began. Spelling tests, milk cartons, and the arithmetic of who is allowed to sit where. But beneath the noise, Lily carried the courage bolt like a secret sun, and somewhere deep inside the school, her mother pushed a mop across the shining floor, praying that her daughter would not be ground down by the world she was fighting to keep clean. The Hale mansion stood at the crest of Beacon Hill like a cathedral to wealth. Its windows glittered with imported glass, its doors heavy with ironwork that could have belonged to a fortress. The garden was manicured into obedience, hedges trimmed as if afraid of untidiness. To passers-by, it was a palace of stability, but to Ethan, it was a cage polished to look like freedom. Inside, the silence was never soft. It rang off marble floors, echoed through chandeliers, filled the spaces where laughter ought to have lived. Servants moved in quiet lines, their eyes lowered, careful never to linger on the boy limping down the hall with his uneven gait. They had learned, through whispered orders, that sympathy was not welcome here. Veronica Hale, Ethan's stepmother, ensured as much. She swept through corridors in silk and heels, her perfume sharp as citrus and cold as ice. She was beautiful in the way winter is beautiful, crisp, dazzling, and merciless. To outsiders, she seemed a picture of refinement, a guardian of the Hale legacy. But to Ethan, she was the architect of his pain. "Stand up straighter," she said one morning, watching him from the edge of the drawing room. Her voice was smooth as polished stone. "Don't limp like that. You shame your father when you limp." Ethan tried to obey. He straightened, clenched his teeth, forced the prosthetic joint to bend as she demanded. Pain lanced up his leg like fire. "Better," Veronica murmured, though her lips barely curved. She scribbled something in her leather notebook, records of every stumble, every weakness, every detail she could use to control the boy she called her stepson, but treated as a liability. Ethan wanted to tell her the truth. The joint was wrong. The angle of the socket burned, the straps rubbed raw, something had been altered. But when he had once tried, she had leaned down so close he could see her pupils sharpen like knives. "Do you know what happens to broken things in this house?" she whispered. "They are replaced." He had been silent ever since. At night, when the house darkened, Veronica's orders continued in quieter ways. Bottles lined the cabinet in the medical room. Clear pills, blue pills, syrups with names Ethan couldn't pronounce. She measured them into cups with the precision of a jeweler, sliding them across the counter as though they were love. "Drink," she would command. The liquid dulled him, made his head heavy, slowed his thoughts until the world felt wrapped in wool. Sometimes he fought to keep his eyes open, desperate to remember what his father's laugh had sounded like. But Veronica wanted obedience, not memory. She had learned that compliance was easier when children were too tired to resist. Yet there were moments, fleeting and stubborn, when Ethan still felt himself. In his drawer, hidden beneath shirts he never wore, lay sketches he made with a stub of pencil, clumsy drawings of trees, of playground swings, of a girl with uneven braids and shoes rubbed raw at the heels. Lily. He could not say her name aloud in this house, but he could keep her face on paper. She had stood for him when no one else had. That memory was the only medicine he trusted. Marcus Hale, Ethan's father, moved through the mansion like a guest in his own home. Business tethered him to boardrooms and flights, to stock tickers and signatures that shaped markets. He was a man who built towers in cities he rarely visited, who negotiated contracts over oceans without ever watching the tide. When he returned to Boston, it was with the detachment of a general surveying his estate. He loved his son. At least he believed he did. But love to Marcus had always been expressed in tutors, in equipment, in carefully chosen specialists whose fees were proof of devotion. He thought Veronica's regimen was discipline, that her strictness was necessity. He mistook cruelty for care because he had not yet dared to look closely. One evening, Marcus entered the study where Veronica sat by the fire with a glass of wine. Ethan was slumped in a chair, half asleep, his lips pale. "Is he all right?" Marcus asked, a flicker of unease in his voice. "He's fine," Veronica said smoothly. "Just tired. His therapy is intensive. If you want him to walk properly, we must be relentless." Marcus nodded, though his eyes lingered longer than usual. Something in the boy's face unsettled him. The hollowness of his cheeks, the way his small hand twitched as if reaching for something unseen. Later that night, while Veronica was on the phone in another room, Marcus wandered into the medical cabinet. He scanned the bottles, the labels, the dates. Too many prescriptions, too many dosages. He picked up one bottle, frowned at the pharmacy name, then set it back. A strange heaviness pressed on his chest. He told himself he was imagining things, that Veronica was meticulous, that nothing in this house escaped her precision. Still, he slept poorly. Ethan lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling where the shadows made rivers across plaster. He remembered Lily's voice, small but steady, saying, "Don't touch him." He pressed the bolt she had returned to him into his palm, hiding it beneath the blanket. He did not know that children from poor farms and children of billionaires were not supposed to meet, not supposed to bind their lives together. He only knew that when she had looked at him, he had not felt broken. The house sighed in its sleep. Veronica's heels clicked once more in the corridor before she retired. The silence returned, vast and merciless. Ethan closed his eyes, willing himself into dreams where the marble floors turned into fields, where the weight of wealth dissolved into the simple warmth of friendship. In the world outside, lights burned in offices Marcus had built. Money shifted invisibly across continents. But in one vast house in Boston, a boy tried to breathe against the straps of a leg made deliberately painful, watched over by a woman whose beauty was as cold as iron. The story of what was coming, betrayal, revelation, judgment, was already waiting in the shadows. But for now, there was only a child pressing a steel bolt into his palm like a prayer, refusing to let go. The courtyard smelled of chalk dust and autumn leaves. It was recess, that brief pause when children's worlds tilted away from books toward laughter, skipping ropes, and whispers. Ethan sat alone on the edge of the stone steps, one hand pressed discreetly against the strap of his prosthetic. Each step he had taken that morning had burned. He did not cry. Crying only fed the wolves. A shadow fell across his knees. "Want some?" Lily asked, holding out a piece of cornbread wrapped in wax paper. The edges were uneven, the paper smudged with butter stains. It was not the sort of thing children in this school usually offered. Their lunches came in gleaming boxes lined with compartments, sandwiches cut diagonally with precision. Lily's offering looked plain, almost homely, but her eyes made it something else. Ethan hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, pushing it closer. "But I want to." He took it carefully, as if it might crumble in his fingers. The first bite carried the sweetness of corn and a hint of smoke, as though the bread itself remembered the farm stove it had come from. It filled him with warmth, stranger than any medicine. He looked up. Lily was already nibbling on her own piece, crumbs catching on her chin. "My mom made it," she explained, as though apologizing. "She says food tastes better when you share it." Ethan swallowed, something thick rising in his throat. He wanted to tell her it was the best thing he'd tasted in weeks, that everything else in his life felt artificial except this small square of bread. But the words crowded against each other and never made it out. Instead, he fumbled in his pocket. A tiny steel bolt, cool to the touch, rolled into his palm. He had kept it hidden since the fall, a loose piece from the joint of his prosthetic. Veronica had scolded him when she noticed it missing, said broken things must be discarded. Yet Ethan had saved it, clutching it under his pillow like a secret. He placed it in Lily's hand. "Here." She blinked. "What is it?" "A courage bolt," he said. "From my leg. You keep it, and it'll make you brave." Her mouth opened slightly as though she were trying to decide whether this was a joke. But Ethan's face was too solemn, too fragile. She closed her fingers around the bolt and nodded, as if accepting an oath. "Why give it to me?" "Because..." He looked down at his shoes, scuffed despite their polish. "You stood up for me. No one's ever done that before." The words hung between them like a fragile thread. For the first time, Ethan felt lighter. His pain didn't vanish, but it shifted, dulled by the strange certainty that someone else carried a piece of it now. A shout broke across the courtyard. Two boys from their class, smirking, pointed in their direction. "Tin boy found a girlfriend!" Laughter followed, harsh and shrill. Ethan flushed, his chest tightening. Instinct told him to shrink, to pretend he hadn't heard. But Lily stood. "Better a tin boy than a bully," she said loudly, her chin lifted. The boys faltered, surprised by her quickness. Their laughter sputtered into mutters, then dissolved. Ethan stared at her, astonished. She had not only stood for him, she had stood with him. When the bell rang, they walked back into class side by side. Lily carried the courage bolt in her pocket, rolling it between her fingers like a talisman. Ethan limped, but for once the weight of each step did not feel like shame. That afternoon, while the others scribbled math problems and daydreamed about their tutors and tennis lessons, Ethan caught Lily's gaze across the room. She smiled, just a small thing, barely there, but it steadied him like an anchor. At dismissal, Marcus's chauffeur waited at the curb with the black car, engine humming. Ethan usually dreaded the moment, sliding into leather seats that smelled of polish and absence, bracing for Veronica's cold glance at home. But as he stepped inside, he looked back once more. Lily was climbing into her mother's rusted truck, the door squealing in protest. Sarah Carter gave her daughter a tired smile, wiping sweat from her brow with a rag that smelled faintly of ammonia. For a second their worlds touched, wealth and weariness, polish and bleach. And in the space between, two children had forged something stronger than either: trust. That night, Ethan sat at his desk, pencil scratching against paper. He drew again. The ginkgo tree in the courtyard, a square of cornbread, a girl's uneven braids. He tucked the page under his pillow before the pills dulled his eyelids. In another part of Boston, Lily set the steel bolt on her windowsill where moonlight could touch it, as if testing whether courage could grow in silver light. Neither knew what trials lay ahead: the betrayals, the revelations, the courtroom battles where adults would argue over their fates. For now, they only knew that in a schoolyard ruled by cruelty, they had found a way to stand together. And sometimes, for children, that is enough to change the world. The morning began with a brittle sky. Clouds gathered thin as glass, and the playground glistened with the dew of early autumn. Ethan walked carefully across the courtyard, his limp more pronounced than usual. The straps of his prosthetic dug deeper each day, leaving marks he dared not show anyone. He told himself to endure, to count steps as soldiers marching, 1-2, 1-2. But even soldiers grow weary. The class lined up for physical education. Whistles shrilled, sneakers squeaked against pavement, children's laughter rang in sharp bursts. Ethan dreaded this hour more than any other. Running exposed everything: the limp, the uneven pace, the sound of the prosthetic joint grinding faintly. Yet he obeyed, standing at the edge of the track while the others bounced in restless energy. "Ready!" the coach barked. The children shot forward. Dust rose beneath their feet. Ethan tried to follow, the metal limb dragging like an anchor. With each stride, fire streaked from his knee to his hip. He clenched his teeth, forcing himself onward, but the pain gathered like a storm, growing heavier with every step. His breath tore ragged from his throat. The world began to tilt. He fell. It was not the usual stumble, not the clumsy trip he could disguise with a quick rise. This time his body collapsed fully, hitting the ground with a sound that silenced even the loudest jeers. His cheek pressed into the rough gravel, eyes wide but unfocused. The prosthetic leg twisted at an unnatural angle, straps biting into swollen skin. For a moment, no one moved. The other children froze mid-laughter, caught between instinct and cruelty. Then a small figure broke through the ring of hesitation. Lily Carter darted forward, dropping to her knees beside him. "Ethan, can you hear me?" Her voice shook, but carried further than the coach's whistle. Ethan tried to speak. Only a faint moan slipped through his lips. "Help me lift him," Lily cried. She looked up, and her mother was already running across the field. Sarah had been nearby, hauling a mop bucket back to the closet when she saw the boy fall. She dropped everything. Her hands, calloused from scrubbing, were suddenly gentle as she knelt beside Ethan. Together, mother and daughter lifted him, awkwardly, carefully, while the coach shouted for space. Ethan's head lolled against Sarah's shoulder as she half-carried him across the courtyard to the nurse's office. His skin burned with fever. His body was too light in her arms. Inside, the school nurse pulled back the straps of the prosthetic and froze. The alignment was wrong, grotesquely so, as though someone had forced the joint to bend against its natural fit. The skin beneath was raw, bruised, nearly broken. "Who adjusted this leg?" the nurse demanded, horrified. Sarah shook her head. "He has specialists, doesn't he? Private doctors?" The nurse bit her lip, examining the warped angle of the socket. "This wasn't an accident. Someone tampered with it. Deliberately." The words hung in the sterile air, heavier than the scent of antiseptic. Lily clutched Ethan's hand, her eyes wide. She could feel him trembling even in unconsciousness. "Will he be okay?" she whispered. "With proper care, yes," the nurse said grimly. "But this was done to cause pain." Sarah's heart clenched. She had scrubbed the floors of mansions. She had overheard whispers of wealth's secret cruelties. But to see a child, a 6-year-old boy, suffering from such cold intent made her blood run cold. She brushed the damp hair from Ethan's forehead and thought of her own daughter, thought of the fragility of children caught in battles not their own. "I need to call his father," the nurse said. Sarah nodded. "Do it quickly." Lily sat at Ethan's side, refusing to move. She squeezed his fingers as though by sheer will she could tether him to the room. His eyelids fluttered, and for a moment his gaze found hers. Weak, clouded, but there, recognition, gratitude, and fear all tangled in one fragile glance. "I've got you," Lily whispered. "You're not alone." The nurse scribbled notes furiously, her voice shaking as she dialed. "This must be reported. No child should suffer like this." Sarah placed a steadying hand on Lily's shoulder. She had seen enough in life to know that truth often crawled uphill while lies sped down like water. Still, she whispered to her daughter, "You did the right thing. You were brave." Ethan stirred again, lips parting. His voice was faint as dust. "Don't. Let her." "Who?" Sarah asked gently, leaning close. But the boy's strength gave out, and he slipped back into silence. The news spread quickly, in the strange way bad news always does. Teachers whispered in corridors. Parents glanced at one another during pickup. And somewhere in a high-rise office, Marcus Hale's phone buzzed with the call that would uncoil everything he thought he knew about his family. In the quiet of the nurse's office, however, time slowed. Lily sat guard over Ethan, the steel courage bolt warm in her pocket. She pressed it into his palm and whispered again, "You're safe now." And though he did not answer, his fingers twitched as if he understood. The call came while Marcus Hale was in his glass-walled office, a room high above Boston Harbor where even silence seemed expensive. The school nurse's voice carried urgency. Ethan had collapsed during physical education, his prosthetic warped, the skin beneath raw. She used one word Marcus could not ignore: tampered. By the time his car reached the school, he had stopped pretending business mattered more. In the nurse's office, Ethan lay pale and trembling, the prosthetic twisted grotesquely. Beside him sat a little girl, Lily, her small hand resting over his. She stood when Marcus entered, eyes wary but steady. "He gave me this," she whispered, holding out a small steel bolt. "Said it was for courage." The nurse showed Marcus the photographs. Screws reversed, socket misaligned, swelling that no accident could explain. "Someone did this deliberately," she said. Sarah Carter, the janitor he recognized vaguely, confirmed she and Lily had carried Ethan in. For once, Marcus found no words of authority, only gratitude he had forgotten how to voice. At the hospital, specialists confirmed it. The prosthetic had been intentionally altered. Bandages wrapped Ethan's leg while sedation gave him rest. Marcus paced the corridor, reading pharmacy logs. The lawyers rushed to his phone. Prescriptions had been filled from a private clinic, sedatives his pediatrician had never ordered. The signature on the last pickup was Veronica's. He called her. Her voice was smooth, untroubled. "He fell again? You know how clumsy he is when he refuses therapy." "The screws were reversed," Marcus said evenly. A pause, then, "Sue the fitter. That's their negligence, not mine." But the pause had already told him everything. That night, after Ethan slept, Marcus opened the medical cabinet at home. Rows of bottles gleamed like soldiers. In the bottom drawer lay a hex wrench with grease still clinging to it. He placed it on the counter beside the pharmacy receipts. When Veronica entered, heels sharp against the marble, she offered her usual smile. "You look tired." "I'm wide awake," Marcus replied. His voice was calm enough to make the walls listen. "From this moment, you will not touch his medication, his equipment, or him. Ever again." Her laughter bent toward contempt. "You can't possibly—" "I can," he said, "and I will." Later, as he drove back to the hospital, the city lights blurred into streaks of cold fire. For years, he had believed discipline was love, structure was care, silence was strength. Now he understood. He had been absent long enough for cruelty to crown itself as authority. In the hospital room, Ethan stirred, blinking at his father with wary eyes. Marcus bent close. "I'm here," he whispered, "and I will be, from now on." On the bedside table, the courage bolt gleamed faintly under the lamp. Marcus lifted it, turned it once in his hand, then set it back within reach of his son. A thing made to hold pieces together. So, he thought, was he? The night smelled of hay and old wood. Out beyond Boston's edges, where street lamps gave way to stars, the Carter farm sat small against the wide dark. Its barn leaned like a tired shoulder, its fences held together more by memory than nails. In the kitchen window, a single lamp burned, soft as a prayer. Ethan had slipped away from the mansion after dinner, when Veronica's attention was elsewhere, and Marcus was still on calls. He moved carefully through the shadows, his new bandages itching beneath his trousers. The prosthetic still ached, but the ache was honest this time, not twisted by sabotage. He carried nothing but determination and the memory of a girl who had not turned away when everyone else did. By the time he reached the gravel road leading to the Carter farm, the air was colder, tinged with the scent of turned earth. He paused at the gate, uncertain whether he belonged, then pushed it open with a squeak that startled the chickens into restless clucking. Lily met him at the barn door. She wore her pajamas, patched at the knees, and held a lantern so old the glass bowed inwards. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "I had to," he said, breathless from the effort of walking. "I couldn't. I just had to." She didn't scold him. Instead, she led him inside, where bales of hay lined the walls and the air carried the sweetness of dust. They sat together on an overturned crate, the lantern casting shadows that stretched like giants across the rafters. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two children searching for words larger than themselves. "My dad used to fix things in here," Lily said finally, looking up at the beams. "He said a barn should sound alive when the wind comes. That way you know it's breathing." Ethan listened, the words sinking into him. "What happened to him?" She traced a finger along the wood grain. "The tractor. He thought it was fine. It wasn't. He never came back from the field." Her voice wavered, but she didn't cry. "Mom says I'm brave, but really I just stopped asking where he went." Ethan's throat tightened. He had lost something too, though not to death. His own father was alive, powerful, feared. And yet Ethan had lived years without him, a kind of absence that hurt differently, less final, but just as heavy. "My mom. My stepmom, really," he whispered. "She changes things. My leg, my medicine. She says it's for my own good, but it hurts. It always hurts." For the first time, he let himself cry. Not loud, not with sobs, but with tears that streaked quietly down his face and dropped onto the straw. Lily put the lantern down and wrapped her thin arms around him. They stayed like that. Two small figures in a barn that had once held laughter, now holding grief together. After a while, Lily pulled something from her pocket, the steel courage bolt. She placed it in Ethan's palm. "You need it back more than I do." He shook his head. "No, it's yours now. That's how courage works. You keep it, and then I know it's safe." She studied him with solemn eyes, then closed her fist around the bolt again. "Then I'll guard it." Outside, the night deepened, the crickets steady as a heartbeat. Sarah Carter peeked into the barn, drawn by the glow. She found them sitting shoulder to shoulder, neither ashamed nor afraid. She said nothing, only left the door ajar so the night breeze could slip in, carrying the scent of clover. When at last Ethan rose to leave, Lily walked him back to the gate. He limped, but not with shame. "You'll be okay?" she asked. He nodded, though the answer was uncertain. "Not if I'm alone. But maybe if you're there." She smiled, small but real. "Then you're not alone." The gate creaked shut behind him. Ethan turned once to see her standing in the lantern light, a figure small but unshakable. He carried that image with him into the dark, back toward the mansion where silence and suspicion waited. For the first time, though, the silence inside him felt less absolute. He had touched another life, and it had held. Some friendships are forged in play, others are tempered in fire. Theirs was the second kind, a bond born of wounds too deep for words, made strong by the simple act of staying. And though neither child could yet name it, the night in the barn would live inside them as the moment when pain turned into promise. The storm began not with thunder, but with the sound of heels on marble. Ethan had just returned from the farm, the warmth of Lily's lantern still flickering in his chest, when the front doors of the Hale mansion opened and Veronica's shadow stretched long across the hall. Her eyes found him instantly, sharp as knives catching light. "Where were you?" Her voice was quiet, which made it worse. Ethan froze. His legs still ached from the walk. Hay clung stubbornly to his trousers. He had no excuse, only truth, and truth was the one thing Veronica never forgave. "I was with a friend," he whispered. The silence that followed seemed to thicken the air. Veronica stepped closer, her perfume cool and suffocating. "A friend," she repeated, tasting the word as though it were poison. "Do you mean the janitor's girl? The farm rat? After everything I've done to make you presentable, you choose her?" Ethan's small shoulders drew inward. She helped me." Veronica's hand closed around his arm, nails pressing crescents into his skin. I told you never to see her again. Do you think I speak for amusement? You are a Hale. You don't crawl into barns. You don't— Her tirade broke off because another voice had entered the hall, a voice that did not raise itself yet, carried farther than hers ever could. Enough. Marcus Hale stood in the doorway of the study. His tie hung loose, his expression carved from stone. He had been waiting for this moment, tracing the lines of betrayal through pharmacy records, photographs, and whispers. Tonight, he would stop waiting. Marcus, Veronica said smoothly, her grip on Ethan loosening but not releasing. You're home early. I should have been home years ago, he replied. His gaze fell on Ethan's arm in her grasp. Let him go! She hesitated, calculating, then dropped her hand as though the boy were nothing. Ethan stumbled back toward the staircase, his breath trembling. Marcus moved forward, every step deliberate. I know about the prosthetic, he said. The screws reversed, the socket twisted. I know about the sedatives, prescriptions filled under your name. I know what you've done. Veronica's face did not falter. She laughed lightly, the sound brittle. Please, you're letting paranoia guide you. Children fall, doctors overprescribe, and you— She leaned closer, voice silked with contempt. You've been absent long enough that guilt makes you see monsters in shadows. No, Marcus said. His voice dropped lower. I've been absent long enough for the monsters to believe they were safe. For the first time, Veronica's mask slipped, a flicker of unease crossing her features. You can't prove anything, she hissed. I can, he said, placing a folder on the table. Inside were the pharmacy receipts, the prosthetist's written statement, the nurse's photographs. And I will. This isn't just between us anymore. Tomorrow a judge will hear it. Tonight, Ethan sleeps without your hand anywhere near him. Ethan watched from the staircase, gripping the banister so hard his knuckles whitened. His father's words struck like thunder he had never expected to hear, thunder that shook the walls not with fear, but with possibility. Veronica's composure fractured. You would destroy me? No, Marcus answered coldly. You destroyed yourself the first time you chose control over care. I'm only refusing to look away. For a long moment, the house was silent except for the clock ticking its verdict. Then Marcus turned to his son. Ethan, go upstairs, pack a bag. Tomorrow we'll leave this house together. Ethan's breath caught. He looked from Veronica's face, rigid with fury, back to his father's, steady for the first time he could remember. Slowly, he nodded and climbed the stairs. Veronica's voice followed him, sharp as broken glass. You think a courtroom will listen to a child? To a janitor's testimony? You'll drag our name through mud for what, a bolt of steel and a story? Marcus faced her fully. Not a story. The truth. And the truth has a way of surviving mud. She turned away then, her silence more dangerous than any words. But Marcus no longer cared for her silence. He cared only for the boy upstairs, folding clothes into a bag with shaking hands, whispering under his breath that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would be different. Outside, the city lights flickered as if bearing witness. Inside, for the first time, the Hale mansion felt less like a fortress and more like a battlefield where truth had finally been spoken. And somewhere on a windowsill in a farmhouse, a small steel bolt gleamed under moonlight, already waiting for the day it would be carried into a courtroom. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and old paper. High windows let in the Boston light, pale and unforgiving, as though the sky itself had come to witness. Ethan sat beside his father, small shoulders straightened by determination, though his hands trembled in his lap. Marcus's palm rested gently on his son's back, steadying without pushing. Across the aisle, Veronica's lawyer shuffled a stack of papers, his expression calm but predatory. She herself sat immaculate, pearls gleaming at her throat, eyes cold as ever. The judge entered, robes sweeping, and the room rose. When everyone sat again, the silence pressed like weight. "We are here to determine the welfare of Ethan Hale," the judge said, voice even but edged with gravity. "The evidence will speak. Let us begin." The school nurse testified first. She described Ethan's collapse during PE, the swelling, the twisted prosthetic. Photographs were entered into evidence, straps digging into raw flesh, angles that no trained technician would permit. "This was not an accident," she said firmly. "It was deliberate." Then came the prosthetist, hands folded, voice professional but tight with anger. "The screws had been reversed, the socket forced into misalignment. The only outcome of such an adjustment is pain." Her testimony left the room still, as though every adult present had suddenly remembered what cruelty to a child truly meant. Sarah Carter stood next, uniform plain, voice unadorned. She told of carrying Ethan with her daughter into the nurse's office, of seeing him fevered and trembling. "I clean those hallways every day," she said. "I see the way the children look at him, the way he walks alone. But I also saw the way my daughter held his hand. No child should be punished for finding a friend." And then came Lily. The courtroom seemed to grow larger as she was sworn in, her small figure dwarfed by the witness stand. She clutched the courage bolt in her palm, silver glinting between her fingers. Her voice shook at first. "He's not broken," she said, eyes flicking toward Ethan. "He just hurts. Someone tried to make him hurt more." She paused, gathering strength. "But he's still my friend, and friends don't leave each other." The judge leaned forward, his lined face softening. "Child, can you tell me why you believe someone hurt him?" "Because when he fell, he said it," Lily replied simply. "And because when I looked at his eyes, I knew it wasn't clumsy. It was pain somebody wanted him to feel." Her words, unpolished and clear, cut deeper than any lawyer's argument. The gallery murmured. Even Marcus felt his throat tighten. When it was Veronica's turn, her lawyer spoke of discipline, of medical necessity, of misunderstandings exaggerated by emotion. She smiled faintly as if the whole proceeding were beneath her. But when the judge asked directly, "Did you authorize or administer medication outside the pediatrician's prescriptions?" she hesitated. That hesitation was louder than any denial. Marcus rose for his own testimony. His voice was measured, each word a stone laid with care. He admitted his absences, admitted he had been blind. "But blindness is not innocence," he said. "I should have seen. I should have listened sooner. I will not fail again." He placed the pharmacy receipts on the stand, signatures clear, Veronica's name undeniable. The room shifted. Even Veronica's lawyer exhaled as though conceding the tide. When closing arguments ended, the judge removed his glasses and looked out over the courtroom. "The duty of this court is not to punish vengeance or protect pride. It is to protect a child. The evidence is overwhelming." He turned his gaze toward Marcus. "Custody is awarded solely to the father. All medical authority rests with him. Veronica Hale is to have no role in the child's care, effective immediately." The gavel struck. Ethan exhaled as if the air had returned to him for the first time in months. Marcus pulled him close, whispering into his hair, "It's over. You're safe." Sarah squeezed Lily's shoulder with quiet pride. The little girl lifted the bolt in her hand and held it up for Ethan to see. He smiled, small, tired, but real. As the courtroom emptied, Veronica sat frozen, her pearls suddenly heavy around her neck. For the first time, she looked cornered, but neither Marcus nor Ethan spared her another glance. They had already turned toward the door, toward the sunlight, toward the possibility of life without shadows. The schoolyard had never looked so alive. Autumn banners rippled above the track, and parents filled the bleachers, their cheers bright as brass. It was the end-of-term fun run, though for Ethan Hale the name felt cruel. Running had always meant shame, the stumble, the limp, the whispers. But today, the weight on his leg was different. His prosthetic had been refitted by hands that wanted healing, not control. The straps no longer cut into him. The pain was real, but it was honest pain, the kind that promised strength instead of defeat. Marcus stood near the sidelines, suit discarded for once, sleeves rolled up as though he had remembered how to be only a father. His gaze never left his son. Sarah Carter stood nearby, one hand resting on Lily's shoulder, pride radiating from both of them like quiet fire. The whistle blew. Children surged forward in a tide of sneakers and laughter. Ethan pushed off, the world tilting for an instant as his metal joint caught the earth. Then it held. He found rhythm, uneven but his own. His chest burned, his breath tore, but the track bent itself beneath him. And Lily was there. She ran beside him, her braids flying, her shoes thudding soft but steady. She did not outpace him, did not slow too much. She simply matched him, step for step, as though they were two halves of a whole machine. Around the first bend, voices rose. "Go, Ethan!" "You've got this!" Marcus's voice joined, rougher than he had meant, thick with something he had not felt in years. Halfway through, Ethan faltered. The crowd blurred, his lungs clawed for air. He nearly stumbled, the old fear rushing back. But then Lily reached out, not to pull, not to push, just to brush her fingertips against his arm. A signal. You're not alone. He steadied. Step after step, the finish line grew closer, white tape glinting in the sun. He thought of nights under hospital lights, of Veronica's whispering cruelty, of silence in a mansion too large for one child, and he thought of Lily's barn, of her hand around his when he cried, of the steel bolt glowing on the windowsill. The last stretch came. He pushed harder. The crowd rose to its feet. And then, he crossed. The tape snapped against his chest. He stumbled forward, laughing and gasping all at once. Lily crossed beside him, triumphant without caring who noticed. For a moment, the world seemed to roar, not with cruelty but with wonder. Teachers clapped, parents shouted, even the children who had once mocked him cheered as though something in them had shifted too. Ethan collapsed to his knees, not from failure but from victory. Lily knelt beside him, grinning through her exhaustion. In her hand, still clenched tight, was the courage bolt. She pressed it into his palm. "You did it," she said simply. He closed his fingers around it, the metal warm with both their heat. "No," he whispered. "We did." Marcus reached them then, lifting his son high into his arms. For the first time in Ethan's memory, his father's embrace was not distant, not perfunctory. It was whole. Sarah watched, her hand tightening around Lily's. The moment held like sunlight through glass. In the weeks to come, the story would ripple beyond the schoolyard. Whispers would become headlines. A courtroom's verdict would echo into boardrooms and breakfast tables. But none of that mattered here. Here, on this simple track in Boston, a boy once mocked as broken had run, and a girl once dismissed as poor had proven herself his anchor. Above them, the sky spread wide and blue. Below, a small steel bolt gleamed between two small hands, a fragment once discarded, now the symbol of everything they had built: courage, friendship, and the quiet victory of truth over cruelty. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If it touched your heart, please subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Your words might be the little bolt of courage someone else needs.